welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. As you all can see, I have with me Lieutenant General Dr. R.S. Panwar. So, General Sir had taken up a very interesting topic with me the last time, and we got into a conversation. The topic last time was information warfare. This time, we actually thought that we will come up with something which is unique to the world of warfare, which is artificial intelligence. I'm sure most of you who are watching the video have heard the news of Chinese deploying some sort of robots on the line of actual control, and there are loads of other things which are happening in terms of artificial intelligence. We need to understand this entire phenomenon. What is it all about? How is it going to be used in the military? What are the connotations of this entire project? And to discuss that, as I said, I have with me General Panwar, who's going to take us through a story of artificial intelligence. Sir, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your expertise within the subject. And I know you've written quite a bit about it, and it'll be great to hear your insights put into this one compact episode.
Thanks very much, Aadi. It's always a pleasure talking to you. It was great having that last interaction on information operations. And let's see how what best we can do during, as you said, a very interesting and complex topic. Artificial intelligence has to be leveraged in military operations, what we will talk about. And a very good evening to all your viewers. I hope this interaction is useful for them.
I'm sure it will be, sir. So to begin with, the character of warfare, as we were talking last time as well, with information warfare and other things being brought in, is changing over and over again. Everybody, first it was probably a axe and a sword, and then came the bow and arrow, and then came the first kind of guns, and so technology kind of developed, and things became better and better in terms of fighting of the war. The advances today we see in terms of technology are artificial intelligence, and these actually are believed to have unlimited potential. People just don't know what this artificial intelligence warfare sort of a game has in store for us today. I'd like you to take us through your thoughts in terms of what changes will it bring onto warfighting methodologies powered by artificial intelligence, likely in the coming few years in the future, sir.
Sure. You rightly touched upon the startings of warfare when it used to be fought with bows and arrows and hand-to-hand fighting and all. Over the centuries, technology has played a huge role in changing what we refer to as the character of warfare. And at various points in time, there are various ways in which the changing nature of warfare has been sort of captured by various authors and strategists. One of the terms which is normally comes into uh, the literature to explain this aspect is what is referred to as revolution in military weapons. Now, there are many classifications. One of the classifications talks of about 10 different revolutions which have happened so far. I'll certainly not go into all of them. Just to give you a flavor, the last couple of them which are referred to is, for example, what we visualized during the Second World War. Due to and technology drives these revolutions in military areas. That's what the concept is, where it changes into a change in the character of war fighting methodology. So during the Second World War, it was mechanization and partly aviation which brought about the revolution in military affairs. And towards the end, the last of the 10, what we refer to as the nuclear revolution, which, as we know, is what brought the Second World War to an end. Now, then we come to a next juncture is during the 90s, where the technologies, the information and communication technologies, brought in what is referred to as the ongoing, the current, also referred to as systems of systems RNA, which the glimpses of which manifested itself during the Iraq War. Now, it's really speaking, to put it very briefly, since we are not really talking of that revolution, to put it very briefly, the sensors, shooters, and the decision makers, all the entities which build up a war fighting system, are connected via network. So, because of information and communication technology, the OODA loop. There's another element which we need to bring into the picture, even to understand the effects of artificial intelligence, is the OODA loop. The OODA loop is, there are four elements to it: observe, orient, decide, and act. This is applicable all across. I'm not going to do many details. But let's say you have a weapon, you have a sensor, that's the observe part, and then you orient yourself. Then you take a decision to, let's say pull the bullet. Let's say there's a rifle. So you first look through your eyes, that's the sensor. You decide to pull the bullet, and then you pull the trigger. And so the gun, that's the shoot. The gun is the shooter. So that's how the OODA loop is working in a simple thing like a gun. The same thing can be applied to tanks. So when this OODA loop functions via network, that is what we are talking about, the ICT sort of a revolution. So that's one, what is referred to as the network-centric warfare. And the second part of it is information operations. So we've heard about cyber operations, our last interaction, which talked of information operations, influence operations. So these are the two operational concepts which emerge through the systems of systems RNA because of the ICT technology, information and communication technology. Now that is still unfolding. Now we come to AI. Artificial intelligence is widely believed to be responsible for ushering in the next revolution in military affairs, which will unfold over the next 5 to 10 years. The first glimpses of this we have seen during the Azerbaijan Armenia conflict, drone warfare, etc. Of course, that was more to do with drones and not, but certain amount of AI was also used in this drone technology. And then again, in the recent last years, Israel Hamas conflict is being referred to as the first AI war, where artificial intelligence was used not for physical systems so much, but uh, for extracting intelligence. It was used very, very extensively for extracting intelligence. All the tunnels and all that were, targeted, and terrorist locations and gun locations. AI was used. So we have seen the first glimpses of the AI-driven revolution in military affairs, and it is going to fully unfold over the next 5 to 10 years. The way the development is going on. So that is how we should look at. So this is one angle to it. If we look at it from the RNA point of view, effect of AI. The other way to look at it is, uh, we have this OODA loop. So when we look at this OODA loop, AI is going to improve the quality of each of the different aspects. So for example, let's look at sensors. When we look at sensors, the type of information that it gets, it improves the quality of the sensor. Similarly, in the shooters, wherever missiles, etc., so artificial intelligence is going to make those shooters much more precise. Similarly, in the decision making, it is going to get into more and more quality decision making. So every aspect of the OODA loop is going to be improved through the use of AI. A third angle to how the changing nature of warfare is, artificial intelligence, because of the lethal autonomous weapon systems. You may have heard of the term the lethal autonomous weapon systems. The drones have an example which was used in Azerbaijan and all. It is going to remove the soldier further away from the battlefield. So that's the third angle in which we can look at the changing character of warfare, how AI is going to affect because of the autonomy which will come into warfare. So I think with that sort of an introduction, we can proceed ahead and discuss some of the elements in detail.
No, interesting, sir, because when you talk about autonomy, that actually leaves in brings us back to the days of the Cold War when the battle between the missiles and the bombers were taking place. There was a huge argument, which was especially in the US circles, whether they should have these automatic rockets being fired or they should have the manned bombers going forward, and they favored the technology. So it's something that one can actually relate to from history. So
Yeah.
military technology and artificial intelligence till today, we see it in the public domain with regards a more defensive sort of a posture. We see the Iron Dome, which has been in effect in Israel for a long time, and in the recent attacks last year, we saw them being used in a very, very precise manner and very, very effective manner. Laws you've already mentioned, and other military applications are also there. The spectrum is increasing, sir, and day by day, people are coming up with new and new inventions and new styles of artificial intelligence on the battlefield. What could be the various military applications that you would think of currently and in the future that are there in front of us today, sir?
Yeah, right. So, AI, as we see in the non-military domain, AI is already getting into all types of businesses. So it's something like, electricity or computing, which is ubiquitous across all types of systems. Artificial intelligence is just a much more exotic form of computing, and it is going to come up ubiquitously across all types of military systems. So that's the broad end. Coming to specifics, you mentioned lethal autonomous weapon systems. There are several areas in which we can think of how AI is going to have an impact. So, as you see on the slide, the the very first one which you mentioned and I also referred to earlier is autonomous robotic systems. Now, when we say autonomous robotic systems, there are various different categories of these autonomous systems which you can think of. Uh, Five of these are what are listed here on the slide. So we can say non-lethal and defense. Lethal is what we understand what when we kill human beings. So non-lethal and defensive. So you could have autonomous systems for example, disarming of the improvised explosive devices. Where personal harm, you don't put people in personal harm, and autonomous systems are used for this. Then you come to non-lethal and offensive. So, for example, surveillance drones. Now, surveillance drones are not a lethal weapon, but they are used for offensive purposes also because you first survey, zero in on a target, and thereafter you shoot towards it. So, it is for an offensive sort of an operation that you use drones. Then you can think of lethal and defensive. Now, examples of lethal and defensive. One example is, for example, the well-known Iron Dome of Israel. Now, certain amount of AI technology has been used as the Iron Dome also is improved. AI has come into its operations, so it tracks where it is going to land, if it is going to population areas, etc. So AI is used for tracking that aspect of it and targeting and prioritizing and targeting. That's how it is used in the Iron Dome. Now, the next type of autonomous system we can think of is lethal and defensive, which is examples of this are firstly the Iron Dome. Where Iron Dome, we know the Israel's Iron Dome, which intercepts incoming missiles. So their artificial intelligence is used to track the incoming missiles where they are likely to land and prioritize the targets accordingly. So that's where AI comes into picture in the Iron Dome. You also have another example. There are robotic sentries deployed on the North-South Korea border by South Korea for any incoming ingress from the opposite side. So it's called the SGR-1. I mean, it's been there for several years now. So such robotic sentries, if they function in an autonomous mode, there again you can think of as lethal and defensive. Lethal because they are going to kill humans. Then you come to lethal and offensive. So the armed UAVs which we see today are are mostly remotely piloted armed UAVs. They are not autonomous, but gradually artificial intelligence is coming into this area. So you would have autonomous armed UAVs. You would also have armed swarms. You must have heard of swarm technology. They all under development. I mean, we also demonstrated in the last army parade, etc. Certain amount of swarms. There are certain projects of the type of an example being loyal wingmen. Now, the loyal wingman concept is that you have one piloted aircraft, and accompanying the piloted aircraft are a number of autonomous, let's say UAVs accompanying it, and one central pilot controls it, and rest of them are autonomous. So they could be used for surveillance, they could be even used as armed UAVs accompanying. That's called the loyal wingman concept, but their concepts, I mean, given China and Russia and all, loyal wingman is a US concept being developed in Australia. So that's a lethal and offensive type of autonomous system. And then you have, I've listed a category here which will come up as in answer to one of future interaction, subsequent interaction we'll have during this. What I've referred to as lethal, offensive, and ethical. Now, can we? It's a futuristic thing. It's not like you will develop very fast. Can autonomous systems be built with ethical capabilities built into them? So that's a somewhat futuristic, maybe several decades or more away. So I've listed it because that's also being thought of. So much about autonomous robotic systems. This is one area. The second main area is cyberspace operations. We have every day been faced with cyber attacks and offensive and defensive cyber operations are ongoing now and increasing by the day as we are all aware. So in cyber operations, AI is going to improve the quality of offensive as well as defensive cyber operations. So this is one major area in which AI is going to play a role in the information operations part. Again, when I'm talking of cyberspace operations, we should also talk of influence operations. In influence operations for creating deep fakes, then for narratives and creating bots, etc. So many places where AI is going to come into the picture. So that's in the information domain. Autonomous systems, if you talked of earlier, was in the kinetic physical domain. This is in the information domain. Next, we have knowledge application. So I already gave you an example of knowledge application. There is where Amos saw where for intelligence collation, you get inputs from all types of sources, whether it is joint or human. You fuse it together in a very fast time frame, and that's how Israel managed to destroy all those tunnels and very precisely target the Hamas terrorists and all without too much of collateral damage. So those are the knowledge applications. And then you have again a form of knowledge application is artificial intelligence is war gaming and decision making. Now, this is very interesting actually. So in war gaming, you have red teams and blue teams. So you come up with AIs who are acting as red teams to train your command. Now that's in a training mode. But the same AI, if it has learned enough to do war gaming with the blue team, can be used to assist the blue commanders in actual decision making in operations. Now, this is a very complex sort of an affair. A lot of learning is involved in this. So, I'm just indicating some very broad aspects where the areas where AI is going to come in and change the nature of war. So I think I'll stop here. I would go on and on, giving examples of AI will play a role in various types of applications.
So I
And
think,
ultimately, practically, if I may just add, practically there's so much of development which is going on and prototypes are getting developed, including for ground vehicles. UAVs are the easiest to go autonomous. Easiest is in the air. Next, undersea, because obstacles and maneuvering in undersea is a little more difficult than air, and maneuvering on the ground is much more difficult.
hmm,
So these are areas gradually aspects are getting developed by China, by US, by Russia. There are some slides, but I don't want to. Let's see. Okay, I'll just show a couple of slides also.
sure.
Yeah, yeah, some of it. So US Marine Smart. Now, these are examples. The US Navy Sea Hunter. I was talking of the loyal women concept. The US Selkai. This is an example of the loyal women concept. Then you have the Russian marker. These are all autonomous prototypes which have been tested and extensive trials carried out. Then you have the Chinese this submarine which you can see. It's an autonomous submarine, and some of the others. Our own Indian drone swarm, which is also shown here, Israeli drone swarm. So these are the types of systems which are already there on the battlefield. But as time goes along, it will be much more and more expensive. Billions of dollars are spent.
You've just actually taken a little bit of a thought in my mind with when you mentioned ethical systems, and it's something which I think the debate has been on when it picked up from the sci-fi movies, and it came out and people realized, okay, this also can happen, and nobody ever thought these things would have actually come into reality. We also have renowned space experts like Elon Musk who's saying AI can pose an existential, a serious threat to humanity. One of the only things that I can think of is unpredictability. So you don't know how a machine will react to a certain situation. You don't even know how a human being will react to a certain situation. But human beings, uh, the reactions are in a particular in a dimension. It will not cross that. But gauging a machine is something which is very difficult. So what else would you put across in this game, sir?
Yeah, that's a very good and excellent question. What is it about AI that makes it so special, which the whole world, as you said, people like Elon Musk and others also have said that it's likely to create an existential threat to humanity. I mean, those are the types of statements that we do. So, what are these characteristics of AI which make it so powerful? I mean, which is visualized that it is going exponentially in the last over the last decade or so. The power which is coming up and the types of applications. So, what is it? Before I answer that question, one has to first see what exactly is artificial intelligence. We keep using the word artificial intelligence, but what do we mean? I mean, which technology are we referring to? It's a whole basket of technology. Recently, just in April this year, the European Union has come up with the first, what can be referred to as regulation for artificial intelligence. It is still at a proposal stage. It has been proposed by the European Union. It is to be passed by the European Parliament. And it's for the civilian systems as of now. There they attempted to put down what to precisely define what they mean by artificial intelligence. As you see that definition, you will find that right from the very first line of code that you might write in computers, it classifies as intelligence. So ultimately, what is a code doing? It is doing a reasoning of some sort. So whether it is logic programming, whether it is statistical estimates being made through computing, but when we talk of these special characteristics, what we are really referring to is the technology of machine learning. That is where the complexity and the power is coming from. Machine learning and specifically deep learning using many layers of neural networks. Now, so when I'm talking about the characteristics, I'll just touch upon a few characteristics. It is really emerging out of this machine learning technology, deep learning, neural network based technology. Now, what happens? How does this? How does computing or power come out of deep learning? Very broadly speaking, the manner in which it happens is that their neural networks, I'll not go into the architecture of that. First is a learning stage. So you feed in data. In broad, it is learning directly from data. And that's what I'm trying to explain now. How does learning from data? So what happens is, suppose you got to teach a neural network to, let's say, recognize tanks on the ground from the air. Let's say, or if I take a much more mundane example, let's say between a dog and a cat, to recognize dogs and cats, differentiate between dogs and cats. So a simple learning mechanism would be you feed in a lot of photographs of cats, and then you feed in a lot of photographs of dogs, and the cats and dogs are labeled. They are manually labeled photographs, and then you tell the neural network, okay, this is a cat and this is a dog. So that's the learning thing. And thereafter, you feed in an unknown photograph. I mean, between cats and dogs, one of the photographs you feed in, and the neural network will, based on its learning which has gone into the system, it will recognize whether it's a dog or a cat. I mean, that's the basic method in which it works. There is to complicate, to bring in a little more complexity, there's something called reinforcement learning. What it means is that the same example of dogs and cats, if let us say it recognizes the cat correctly, you tell the system, okay, you've done the right job. this is rightly identified as a cat, and so that's reinforced when the system knows, okay, my understanding is correct, so it takes that and it reinforces its learning mechanism. If it is wrong, then also it is fed, okay, this is not a wrong input. So there's a feedback mechanism which is in. So this is how basically machine learning. Now, what is the result of effect of this? Is there are many effects of this which come. Firstly, this is a very powerful system. It might appear like that. It requires huge amounts of data to make it learn, but it is very powerful. But what happens is it brings in a black box characteristic to AI, which means even the developers do not know what is the logic through which this neural network internally is recognizing a cat or a dog. The logic which it is following inside is not known to the developer. The entire logic is a black box. It is non-transparent. Now, when it becomes non-transparent, there are other secondary effects which take. So you mentioned unpredictability. Now, let me take the example of the self-driving car. This Tesla, huge amount of self-driving cars, millions and millions of miles have taken place, and it's gradually improving. And as per Elon Musk, level 5 driving where there will be no steering wheels extra is going to come up in the next few years. I mean, I heard it just a few days back. This is what he was trying to say. But let's now crashes take place. So there are edge cases. So why such a crash takes place when something which the system has not encountered earlier, if a crash takes place, it is extremely difficult to determine what exactly happened. There are people who are, trying to hack the system in the sense that there's a stop sign on the roadside. You put at certain strategic places, you put just small labels on the stop sign. A human will recognize it's still a stop sign, but the computer does not. I'm just taking up some examples. It's not a very easy thing to do, but that also is happening. The point which I'm trying to bring about is there is the characteristic of black box non-explainability, which is there associated with deep learning, and that is why to use it for weapon systems or for decision-making systems which are critical. Suppose you go to release a weapon and you do not know what is the logic being followed is just being recommended by the system, there's a lot of apprehension of using AI systems for such purpose. So, so one is the black box part, the other is the unpredictable. Now, I'll elaborate a little more. This is a very important thing, unpredictability. It is not only because of the black box. It is also because such systems can learn after being deployed. So, once a system is developed, and then you allow it to learn as and when it interacts with more data, it will keep on changing into something which it was not tested for. You see, that's a very important point to understand. If it changes, because now it is learning from the data, so you tested it before feeding it, but now it is further and further learning from the data. Once it is learning, it is changing into something which it was not tested for, so it becomes unpredictable. There may be some, it may be have badly learned. So this unpredictability is a result of the black box, is also a result of self-learning after deployment. I hope I'm making sense. It's a little complex thing to say for non-initiated
No,
developers.
actually, it does make a lot of sense, because you're putting something in the field, and at design phase it is here, but
Yeah,
you can't stop its learning, because then it will be artificial unintelligence because it won't be intelligent anymore. So you got to keep the learning phase on, and it's going to learn
go ahead.
whatever it goes through, and that's going to be unpredictable even further.
There are two ways to look at to go about. You said you cannot stop its learning. Well, that may not be exactly true. If there are certain types of systems where you want it to learn, I'll give an example of where you would want it to learn. But for example, if you are, let's say you wanted to recognize a UAV, autonomous UAV, you wanted to recognize a tank on the ground in a desert terrain, for example. So you taught it to learn, and it does it to level of reliability which you are happy with. Let's say it recognizes with a 99.5% reliability or whatever reliability level you say. Beyond that, if it has already learned to do that, you can switch off the learning mode. It doesn't have to be there. You can switch it off operationally, and then it's fine. But take another example. Let's look at a expert system which is diagnosing, let's say, diseases. Doctors, medical system, where you want more and more inputs to come. Where if it is recognized correctly, the doctor feeds it, reinforces the system, says it recognizes disease correctly, and so it keeps on learning the new symptoms which are coming, new combinations of the system. So that's a particular case that you wanted to learn, but it is not a critical thing because ultimately the final decision it's a decision support system where the final decision is being taken by a doctor. So that both cases are real. But the point to be seen here is that to be careful about it, that systems which learn should not be put into the field for critical tasks. And all are we are talking of in military operations. Most of the tasks are critical. So there one is very careful. So unpredictability is that part. And I mean the associated characteristic of brittleness, which I say, brittleness is a characteristic which I refer to in passing as that if a failure occurs, it could happen in a catastrophic manner, and you can't even guard against it because you have no control over what is happening inside. You only have control over what is being fed and whether it is right or wrong. So the internals are not. There's also a related aspect of explainable AI. There's a lot of research going on how to build in technology. I mean, machine learning and the deep learning which I'm talking about is a black box technology, but there could be other technologies which relate to explainable AI, an AI which is explainable, which is not black box. So a lot of research is going on in that time. And finally, in terms of characteristics, one of the most important things is just the fundamental aspect. It is very powerful because of the power which this technology has. You are trying to give it more and systems more and more autonomy is passing into the system because they are powerful. They're capable of doing it. So you want the autonomy to be there with the system so that things happen fast. So for example, if you have to hire people, you know, so there are thousands of applications. So the first screening is done by AI. So I mean, instead of humans screening the applicants, it is an AI which is screening the applicants. So what happens is certain biases may creep. So AI technologies are blamed for having this great defect of being biased. If the data is not correct, the system will also not function correct. And some of these may be biases which are not intended, unintended bias may be
Hmm.
there, you know. So and lack of accountability, that's another aspect of it. I mean, if a system which is learning on its own and it does something, the person who deployed it cannot be held accountable. So, all these debates which are going on, which will, of course, probably discuss a little more, that, whom do you hold accountable if something goes wrong? So these are various characteristics of, AI interface, both for civilian as well as military systems, much more so in military systems. Existential threats and all are coming up because of these
It's a scary world out there, so that's all I can say. And it's here to help us, but it can also damage in a large way. So you talked about regulation, and this is after you told me that I found out that they've been trying to regulate this thing for the past so many years and up to no result. I also read recently China had put in a paper to the United Nations about regulating and bringing this into some sort of a shape and control. It's funny when China does it because they're going to go ahead and do the right opposite of what they've written in the paper itself. What is this whole regulation all about? And do you think we are anywhere close to building up a regulation to, keep a control of artificial intelligence in warfare?
Sure. So, talking of regulation, and since we are focusing on military operations, because efforts on regulation is going on in the civilian field as well as for military operations. So, for military operations, the primary place where discussions have been going on is at the UN. Since 2014, discussions have been going on. Something called the UN Group of Government Experts on Lethal Autonomous Weapon Systems. The focus there is lethal autonomous weapon systems, and it is actually referred to as regulation for emerging technologies. I mean, that's how it is named, but essentially it is dealing with how to regulate lethal autonomous weapons. Now, it started in 2014 as a normal group of experts, and then they changed it to a group of government experts, which is the next level higher in the UN in 2017. And the discussions are still going on. The last one is, uh, last one was late 2020. I think once or twice a year they meet. Now, what are the points of debate? This debate has been going on. What are points of debate? So the ban proper there, there are activist groups who say lethal autonomy, full autonomy should not be permitted and it should be banned. Use of the full autonomous systems, human control should always be there. That's what the ban activists say, right? Why do they say this? What are their main arguments? I'll just suggest there are several of them, but I'll just respond to a few of them. It's related to international humanitarian law because international humanitarian law is applicable for all weapons. So it would be applicable for lethal autonomous systems. Now, there are three essential characteristics of IHL, International Humanitarian Law. One is called the principle of distinction. Distinction means when you're going into war, you should be able to distinguish between combatants and civilians and not target the civilians, target only the combatants. It's not just that, it is also combatants and including combatants who are left out of battle or who are incapable of fighting. They should not be targeted. That's what the IHL says, right? So the argument goes like this, that artificial intelligence systems, these systems are not yet progressed to the stage where they'll be able to properly distinguish between combatants and civilians, for example, and so it should not be. Full autonomy should not be there. Whenever a decision to kill is to be taken, it should be taken by you. So that's the argument related to the principle of distinction. Then next is the principle of proportionality. Proportionality says that when we use military force, it should be commensurate with the result expected to the situation you have. So there should be proportionate use of force. If your objective is such, you can't use tremendous, disproportionate force. So that's what the principle of proportionality. Now the ban activists say that uh, this sort of a decision requires human judgment, and human judgment is not a characteristic which is possible in today's AI system. So since human judgment is involved, uh, all decisions to kill should be taken by humans. Same argument, but it's from a different direction, right? Then, for example, even for the first one distinction, whenever a decision to kill is taken, there's also an aspect of compassion. That when you finally decide to kill somebody, and a human can make out whether the other person is wanting to react, not react. So there's an element of compassion also involved in the war fighting, which machines will never be capable of having that characteristic of compassion. So this all goes into the principle of proportionality. Then you have something called a Martin's clause. That's the third part. The Martin's clause is to do with human dignity. How does human dignity come into place? The words which I use is principle of humanity and dictates of public conscience. I mean, these are the technical words used there in the Martin's clause. Essentially, the translation of this into our context, in the context we are discussing, is that how can machines take a decision to kill humans? It is against the precepts of human dignity. So it is from that angle. So Martin's laws. So these are types of arguments which are there are several of them. Just the three main ones which are involved. What is the objective? Objective is that there should always be meaningful human control exerted whenever decision to kill is taken on the battlefield. What is the meaning of meaningful human control? Of course, after years of debate, nobody has been able to define correct, come to consensus amongst nations what should be this meaningful human control. But broadly speaking, the ban activists say that every pull of the trigger, every release of the missile, the decision must be taken by. That is what the ban activists. That means full autonomy should not be there in what is referred to as the critical select and engage function. Critical selecting, what is select and engage? That you select which combatant is to be killed and then you target him and that entire cycle of select and engage is carried out autonomously. So that's why this is referred to as critical select and engage function. Because you can have AI in other functions. For example, you can have AI in navigation. You can have AI autonomous takeoff and landing of UAV. So those are non-critical functions, right? Tracking, for example. Tracking is a non-critical function. But the select and engage are critical functions. So in this select and engage cycle, there should always be a human in the loop. Whereas their other view is that you could have a case where several targets, group targets selection is done by a human. So, for example, you know that tanks are operating in a certain area. So you say, okay, in so and so area, over so and so period of time, you send in a setup, you send in a group of armed drones. And you say, okay, whatever tanks you find in that area in this period of time, you destroy all, right? So that's not every pull of trigger is not being decided by human. The human is decided that you take on this group. It's a military target. You take on this group and you destroy. So this is what the other view is. So this is how the debate goes on. People have not been able to come to a conclusion. There are some other angles to this debate. What about enforceability? Enforceability means that AI is working inside a system. Firstly, it's a dual use technology. So whatever development is taking place in technology is going carrying on in the civilian field as well as in the military field. The same can be utilized for military purposes. It's not a special military oriented technology. If tank recognition and engagement is taking place in the engagement recognition technologies are the same. It may be for civilian purposes, it may be for military. So dual use. So how do you stop the development of such a technology? Because the ban activists say you shouldn't even develop. No, that's what they are saying. So how do you stop that? Secondly, how do you know that there is full autonomy or semi-autonomy drone is coming? You do not know whether it is a remotely piloted drone or it is an autonomous drone.
Mm.
So externally, unlike for example a chemical attack, for chemical attack it's a ban according to UN, one of the UN conventions. Chemical ban treaty is there. So you can know that chemical weapons attack is taking place because it is obvious that chemical ban attack is taking place. But how do you make out whether a system is autonomous or not? So it's very difficult to make out externally what is happening. So probability is an aspect. And switching from a non-autonomous mode to an autonomous. So let's look at this. Let's say you have a set of armed drones. So you say, okay, we've developed it to get a semi-autonomous mode, and you send it out in the thing. But then you can always switch. It's only in software, so you can switch to an autonomous mode just by a switch of software because everything is happening in software. So really speaking, so there are various reasons. Enforceability is also an issue. So because of all these, every point of view has been given large number of nations, and so there's no consensus which is getting developed as far as the UN. So this is the debate which is going on, but it is not headed to anything reasonable. Yes, what has been achieved is in 2019 and about a couple of years back, They are 11 principles. I'll not elaborate on that. So, development of AI systems in military operations should take place adhering to so and so place. So that much has been achieved, but nothing much more, which can be which will effectively stymie the development of systems. Nothing like that has come up in the UN. So it's still going the discussion.
That's it's like one can understand why there's no consensus because the field is so vast and it's growing on a daily basis. So it's not something that you can literally update every second into a human discussion because it's a very large paradigm. So having said that, I personally look at an arms race which is on between US, Russia, China, three of the biggest powers in the world in terms of militaries. There is an arms race which is on developing this technology into a very lethal sort of a system to kind of deter the other one, uh, put it across. Would you agree to something like that, or do they have some other stand to justify their development in AI technologies today, sir?
Yeah. So you rightly said that the trade power competition, named US, China, and Russia, essentially what it is wearing out today is basically US in China. Russia is also playing a role. It is putting in a lot of effort in AI technologies. Just touch upon that too. But primarily the trade power competition is between US and China. Now, uh, like I said, since the debate is going on, the developments are also going on. And just to give an idea as to the type of effort which is being put in by these major nations, and what why we are most concerned is that China is our daunting neighbor sitting right across the northern border. I brought up this point including with our last interaction during information operations. But for AI, which is going to unfold on the battlefield, like I said, in the next few years, we have to be very concerned about what. So China is competing with the US, and so let me try and give you an idea as to what is the type of effort which is going on. So it was in 2016 that for the first time, I don't know whether you heard of the word Go. There's a Go game which is there, and it is much much more complex than chess.
Yes.
AI based or non AI computing based software to defeat chess first time came to the fore in the late 90s. I think it was 97 or 98, where some software was developed where it beat the chess champions of the world. It was felt Go is an Eastern game, Korean, China, etc. Eastern sort of thing. It was thought that Go is so complex that computing software to defeat manual Go champions can never be done. It was in 2016 that Lee Sedol, one of the world champion in Go, was defeated. I think 4 out of 5 games by a software called AlphaGo. It was developed by DeepMind, and AlphaGo defeated this champion. That is supposed to be the Sputnik movement for China when they realized that AI can do this and DeepMind being allied sort of a software. This is what they are doing. So that's when they woke up and they came up with a new generation AI development plan, so to say, in 2017. They set a target that by 2030 they will become a AI power, and they are pushing billions of dollars. I mean, in AI industry, not just military, the AI industry is going to become a $150 billion industry as well as China. So that's the amount of resources that are being put in by China. Now, China, when it started doing this, US actually was not putting in so much of effort at that point. But when they saw these developments, then US also came up. Actually, initially the US US has got a concept what they refer to as offset strategy. The first offset, the second offset, and the third offset. Three offset strategies are being talked about so far. The first offset strategy was an offset strategy is that the technological predominance is so much that it translates into military dominance. So they want to use technology to be so far ahead of the adversary that they remain military dominance is maintained. So that's what an offset strategy is about. The first one is linked to the nuclear technology. I mean, only the US had it, so they had a let's say lead over the others based on nuclear technology. The second offset was related to these ICT technologies, which got revealed during the Duck Wars, and China was also observing as to what is this technology which has been developed by the US. The third offset strategy was declared or let's say enunciated sometime in 2014 by the US, and that focused on all these emerging technologies, with AI being one of the central technologies. So that's when the US pushed its focus on AI, but it didn't go. I mean, it didn't get that much of notice, etc. But then when China started doing all this, thereafter US also has spoken up, and it is now trying to match up to what China. Not that it is behind China in AI technologies, but the amount of effort which is being put up. So China is progressing by leaps and bounds, and US is concerned. So it developed its own AI strategy in 2018. Then they came up with something called a Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. That's part of the Department of Defense of the US in 2018, which is supposed to oversee the implementation of absorption of AI technologies across all the US services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine. So that's the Joint AI Center, and it is doing. I mean, there are about 200 odd people in the Joint AI Center, and they are interacting with the private industry, academia, etc., to imbibe AI technologies and kick off the right military-related AI projects. Right then, there's a very important commission which is referred to as the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. This was instituted, I think, sometime in 2019, and it gave its final report in March this year, March or April, I think March this year. It submitted its report, which is 800 pages long. It was headed by Eric Schmidt, one who led you were the head of Google for over 10 years, I think 15 years or so, and also Robert Work, who was the Deputy Secretary of the US, who was the author of the third offset strategy in 2014. So he was also part of this commission. And a group of experts, large group of experts, they went into a lot of detail, and they came out with this report, and recommendations of those technologies already been absorbed into their development plans, etc., their authorization plans, if they have annual authorization plans. It's already been done. I mean, that's the sort of an intensive activity which is going on. Russia is, because of it doesn't have the same set sort of resources. It's doing a lot to focus, but really speaking, it cannot match up to the resources of the US and China. So it is doing. For example, Putin's remark that whoever controls AI will rule the world. I mean, this was his remark way back in, I think, 2016 or 17. He made this remark. It's very off-quoted remark. They came out with a 10-point AI agenda in 2018. And, like US has DARPA, they have something called an Advanced Research Foundation, the equivalent of DARPA. So they are also doing. They've come up with the National Center for Artificial Intelligence. So there are a lot of things. I showed you a photograph also, the Russian marker, that autonomous tank-looking vehicle which I showed a photograph of. So it is focusing a lot, but it is not of the same level as US and China. So how we are concerned is that we have China sitting who's trying to become the dominant power in the world, and the same resources will be pitched against as far as our national security scenario is concerned. So that should be a matter of great concern.
Absolutely, China is the biggest threat, and that's something that, of course, all security and strategic circles are now acknowledging that pretty openly. And their advances in terms of nobody can peek inside, and that their great firewall kind of keeps it, uh, in a place that one can't analyze what's happening in China. Of course, developments in India and any other free countries, it's wide in the open. There's barely anything which can be actually kept confidential for a long time. It just does come out. China is not the case, so it's a very different scenario. Having said that, so what should India do? I think that's just going to be my last question to you. What should India do to counter this threat, or to match up to this threat, which is going to come in front of us in the near future?
Yeah. So that's a question which everybody should be dedicated on, and take action accordingly. So let's see what I can say about this part. Let's see what India has already so far. What is the state of India as of now? What has it done? Looking at all these developments in AI. So, in 2018, India also set up an AI task force for defense for coming up with recommendations for what should be done to for incorporating AI in defense applications. And the report of this task force was submitted. It was headed by the Tata Sons chairman, Chandrasekhar, and there are a large number of experts in that, including some reps from the three services. And the report was submitted in July 2018. Now, there were two of the main recommendations was to set up a defense AI council, which is headed by the defense minister, and a defense AI project agency, which is headed by the defense secretary. So these are the two organizational setups which were made, and these thereafter there was a government order which came out I think in early 2019, which said certain things. There's a few 100 crore per service should be terminated, and they should identify projects, AI projects, to be implemented on a mission mode basis. So certain directions were given how these missions should proceed. So this is what happened in the time frame of 2018-19. So that's the organization's part. Then you have our DRDO laboratory. You have the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Robotics, which is in Bangalore. So it is doing certain R&D, research and development in the area of AI. We also have some other DRDO labs like the CVRD and the R&DE, which are working on certain projects like Muntra is it's a UGV. UGV is a unmanned ground vehicle. UGV is a separate name for that. So Muntra is that. Netra is some sort of a surveillance, you know, theory. And then you have certain things like mini mule and wall robots, etc. So there's certain work which is going on in the DRDO also. Now this is broadly speaking the type of activities is going on, and number of startups and all as far as the private industry is concerned. Number of startups have come up who are working, for example, in the drone technology, and AI will ultimately be part of such technologies which are there. So efforts and all. What I would basically like to make a comment here is that we have probably the realization is there that we have it's a very important technology both for civilian as well as military purposes, and a lot of effort needs to be made. But in my own assessment, the efforts need to be not just redoubled, but maybe by an order of magnitude they have to be increased because of the fact that we are faced with a daunting adversary like China. So, of course, resource, there's always this bread, guns versus butter debate which is there. So, money is, of course, a very important thing in this. But there are many things which can be done uh, to improve the R&D process. This Atmanirbharta that we talk about. So, it's a very good initiative. But according to me, the R&D process itself can be made much more efficient than it is as of now. What I'm saying is applicable across many of these emerging defense technologies. and equally as applicable for artificial intelligence also, which is a central, the most, according to me, the most revolutionary, most important technology, more important than quantum, all these other things which we keep talking about, because quantum is going to become a very important technology, but in a much later time. So parallel efforts have to be there, and I think that realization is also there. Quantum missions have been going on by the government for some years now. So we need to look at the R&D process. Now, what do I mean by that? By that I mean that the firstly there has to be a synergy between the industry, the defense forces, and the academia, with the Department of Defense, our Ministry of Defense, production and all, overseeing the process. But according to me, the armed forces have to be at the tip. Now, why do I say that? You see, artificial intelligence is a soft technology essentially. Now, when I say soft technology, there is, if you look at, let's say, knowledge applications of artificial intelligence. So, if war gaming, etc., it is not something where you can lay down a QR. You lay down a QR and then somebody develops it for you. That sort of an interface is not going to work. Even the US has denied that. There has to be a, shoulder to shoulder, very close interaction with the users and the developers. Because otherwise you cannot really do sensor fusion, because the processes are, it's all process oriented. So processes are so complex that it cannot be put down in a QR. So anyway, in simple terms, what I'm saying is that the interface, the synergy between the defense forces, the academia, and the industry have been made much stronger, and we have to look at the R&D process first. Specifically to do with AI, I feel that organizations similar to the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center of the US Department of Defense needs to come up. Baby steps have been taken in some direction. Some tests has come up, but I think it has to be much more and much faster. We are proceeding pretty. I mean, compared to what is happening by the others, China and US and all, we are proceeding a little. So that's one part of it. Organizations. But before any of these things happen, there has to be a doctrine, concepts and doctrine. How are we going to use AI to fight future wars? So doctrines, thought process have to be put in place, because a totally different method of war fighting. Just like in cyber and information operations we discussed, AI, how it is going to affect the nature of war fighting is really not clear even across the world. I mean, not just in India. So we have to think how we need to fight AI wars, how we are going to fight, visualize, understand the technology, understand its power, develop doctrine, and then only the relevant products is known. You see, so that's one part of doctrine. And the last important part of this is skill development. Skill development. So unless the users understand how the technology works and they can explain the requirements and interact as part of R&D teams, so skill development within the armed forces, I mean skill development in the academia or of the academia, more skill development within the industry and the DRDO, all that requires to go up. But what about the skills within the Ministry of Defense, which is supposed to oversee all these products? And what
Mm.
about skill development within the armed forces? So that is a very important area which needs to be focused on. There need to be centers of excellence. One is artificial intelligence center is going to implement projects or oversee the implementation of projects, but actually developing of skills so that overall expertise of this goes up and we, you know, I mean, we can think of ways and means of how to incorporate AI into warfare. So that is a very important aspect. So armed forces as a pivot for development of AI and all other disruptive technologies in brief is what I would say is where we need to focus.
No, true, sir. I absolutely agree with you because I'm a firm believer of the fact that although wars are really destructive and in terms of life and property, but they also bring in a certain amount of technological change. And I'm also the firm believer that if we didn't have the Second World War, the jet engine would have probably been coming out somewhere around the 70s or the 80s, and we would be today in the era of probably the 50s hopping and going everywhere and probably trying to break the speed of sound and stuff like that is because of military competition that technology kind of gained up. And I'd like to, I mean, my humble note towards your, concluding thoughts with regards to what India should do is one something that I'd like to mention is a culture that we need to create about innovation, technology, and understanding of the latest within not just the society but the leadership of this country as well. And I'm not trying to say anything negatory about the leadership, but it's just the fact that uh, every day there is a development, and the leadership of any country, of any army, or of any research organization needs to be on top of their game to understand this entire thing so that they can take maximum advantage of it. So it's the culture of development and change that needs to be brought in. So this has been an eye opener of a discussion. Actually, we always thought AI to be driving robots and flying drones and stuff like that. We are now talking about these drones that are going to be hovering above the enemy's head, whoever the enemy may be, for hours and hours altogether, and literally attack when it's supposed to attack. We also spoke about a very not a very comfortable position where the machines are going to learn and keep on learning till the time they can, and then react to situation as they go on and learning. So that brings in a whole lot of unpredictability. This is a very wide open range, and I'd like to thank you for actually, crushing it down into this time that we've had and helping us understand this new, very latest aspect of warfare. Thanks once again, sir, and till next time, Jai Hind, sir.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure as always with you. Thanks very much.